Aha, me first this time, before we get into any deep and meaningful analysis. Yeah, I'll come back to that later. Hello, Ed. Like the new haircut, by the way. Becomes you. It becomes you. Love the randomizer as well. Must get that out there straight away. Watched that first vid. Thought it was really useful. It was useful that you felt the club face was closed, and that's the way you called it. And it turns out it was plumb square on more than one occasion. I think later on you went on to sort of suggest that, what do you know? You thought the club face was yay and it was nay, whatever, open or closed, and you said it was embarrassing that you didn't know. I think consider this a scratch player, expert golfer, your the aspirational version of you, the version of you that we're looking to compete with at some point. He would be aiming, perhaps to square his club face, and he'd miss. He'd live 90% of the time within 3 degrees right or 3 degrees left. So he evidently can't tell the difference each and every time between a club face that's maybe slightly open or slightly closed. But I have an idea on that for you, which I'll come back to in a sec. I think I'd prefer the term enlightening rather than embarrassing, that you can't tell where the club face is to quite a nano degree. It's probably going to be pertinent for us to decide when we do tasks, do exercises on the simulator, rather than try and create a totally perfectly neutral path. A functionally neutral path, couple of degrees in, couple of degrees out, is staple for you these days. It hovers around that when you do your thing, your normal thing. But again, if the club face is open, then the ball will tend to start right of that, start right a tad and curve to the right. The openness will determine how much it curves to the right, and also the force applied will determine a lot about how much it ultimately curves. Obviously, you're going to be more forceful with longer clubs, stands to reason. Same with closed club faces. If the club face is a little closed, it will start slightly further left than it might have with the square club face, and it will curve further left, and the amount will depend on the closeness of the face and the force involved. So we kind of know all this, but I think in terms of tactics, if I haven't really impressed it heavily upon you already, I would tend the randomizers there for distances, but I don't know necessarily it specifies that you've got to hit it left to right to create that distance, or right to left. And I think you should probably add that factor to what you're doing and commit to opening the face to some extent. Now, start maybe, if you have to, with a club face that feels miles open, and then finesse it. So we're going in a direction where it's like you're getting more and more precise and more sensitive to shades of openness, and then commit to closedness with other shots, and start to kind of ask yourself for levels of closedness. If you go for 3 degrees, 4 degrees closed just by feel, and it turns out that's 6 degrees closed, or that's only 2 degrees closed, then you learn something from that, and I just think you sort of polish it in. But I think you've probably got to consider that it's only realistic and necessary to keep the ball in business. You commit to a shot shape, left to right, right to left. I think that's important. It's much easier, I think, on a personal note, I don't know what your feeling is about this, but it's much easier to commit to a shot that's got a closed club face or an open club face to some extent, rather than trying to dead nuts perfectly square it and then hope that it's not a little open or a little closed, especially if we're showing all the hallmarks of not necessarily being able to tell. So openness and closeness, shades of grey if you like, I think that's the way to go on that. So that would be my recommendation for how you tweak that exercise. But in the main, absolutely love it. So coming back around to maybe the front on view, I'll move to do that from behind the scenes, if you like. I'll just run a commentary over the top of those lovely crystal clear front on swings. And I think as I'm preempting, I think we've got to make some decisions about what we want to live with and what we don't want to live with. And I'll explain that in a sort of, in a commentary. What am I on about? In a commentary that's as per we normally exchange ideas about your swing from front on. Might throw a couple of comparisons in there from other players who operate at a very high level with some idiosyncrasy and some characteristics which I guess they just accept and they live with, and that's just the way they do it, rather than we see it constantly as going forward. I think we've got a very stable swing. We've certainly got a pretty damn stable swing path. We, from what I can tell, strike the middle of the club face pretty repetitively. If we toe strike it, I don't think it's difficult to imagine that you would deliberately target striking the heel or the toe. If you've been striking the toe incessantly, I wonder what would happen with a player like yourself these days of your prowess if you deliberately just tried to strike the heel, whether you could, or whether you would move the strike pattern as a consequence of simply endeavour, willpower, just the feel of where your club is. That's kind of how I do it. I have to say it's not a complicated thing. It's just a will and a desire to liberate yourself from the shackles of having to get the club into certain positions. I think your positions are excellent. We don't get far enough out of position to have a wantonly, repeatedly kind of unpredictable shot shape. Not anymore anyway. Work long and hard to rid ourselves of those, free ourselves from that particular cage. All right, so I'll jump in to my cockpit and we will have a little look at your front on swing, and I'll talk to you about it. And obviously I want your pushback, feedback about what we do this winter and maybe what we don't do this winter. Maybe we leave well enough alone and we just get better and better at the way we do it rather than we worry about trying to do it differently the whole time. Yes, we're always trying to get better, but getting better at the same thing is sometimes, I think, a good solution. Depends how you feel about that though. You might get a great deal of excitement and satisfaction. I don't get to decide what you find fun, Ed. You might get a lot of satisfaction out of tinkering with your swing. But I think, there's a very thin line between tinkering and having to adapt your swing to suit the shot at hand. So that's some of my feelings on that. Probably can't encapsulate those all in 6 or 7 minutes, but those are my thoughts, keeping them kind of reasonably succinct. And anyway, off to the studio. Over to me. Okay, here he is, the man of the moment. Crystal clear stuff to enjoy. You've got to say, overall, functioning very nicely indeed. Sorry about the background noise. It's the crew next door on the fly coach, not in his sanctuary, but yeah. Anyway, I think there's a lot to be pleased with here, and as you say, recently quite satisfactory results with regard to scoring. A little bit of indemnification, which is nice. So decisions, as I referred to moments ago, decisions like, do we treat the sort of idiosyncrasy, the characteristic of your forward swing, like it's a problem that needs fixing, or do we accept that that's just the way we do it? Now, considerations probably on both sides. When it works well, it works really well. I don't think necessarily the way you do things would lead to sort of an inability to tell whether the club face is open or closed. That really isn't going to be something that is influenced by possibly this quirk. And the sort of only remaining quirk I'm referring to, if you look at your setup, I mean, beautiful orthodoxy to it, a little bit of flair to that lead foot. Like to see that in anticipation of a nice unadulterated rotation in the forward swing, a little bit of slope to the shoulders, tall left side, curve right side, whoopsie, wrong button, left side a little taller than right, as you'd expect to see. From this angle, stable in the backswing, full upper body rotation, not too much shift one way or t'other. We could afford, with an iron, to probably, as we can sort of be a little bit subtler in our moves, we could probably afford to shift a little bit more towards the target if we wanted to squeeze off a slightly lower ball flight and up ball speed a little bit, almost a little bit of a cheat code there, by sort of sneaking our head in front of that line a little bit, because we got forward lean and we got loft on our side. So we could afford to do that these days. We were kind of wary of it before, because if it polluted your longer clubs, your straighter face backward leaning shafts, then we would really struggle with that. So I took it upon myself to make a call that we would want to make sure we held our ground and created an angle of approach, if you like, that wasn't too steep, because of the damage it did to our ability to use our long clubs. So that was the view I took. But I think probably with confidence high and practice time at a premium, we can afford to be a little bit more we could get in front of these iron shots a little bit if we wanted to, flight the ball slightly differently, and again, that would have its considerations in terms of timing the squareness of the face. But it's really hard, other than that little bit of quirkiness in the follow through. And again, I would say, again, idiosyncratic. Let's take a measurement here. Let's look at perhaps your overall height. Let's look at the position, starting position of your center of mass. And let's see if we can sort of detect whether, if that's moving downwards as we move forwards, it would certainly need to move back up again, or else we would need to maybe shorten this lever. All right, so if we make it a bit shorter by dint of flexing it, that might be one of the reasons. But you see, those two things work in harmony, and your ball striking is invariably pretty good. I don't really hear complaints from you that you're ritually striking the ball off the toe end, which you'd sort of expect if the club was moving in towards you and away from you chronically. I think just the distance between the club head and your centre of mass maybe gets slightly smaller, which isn't a perfect scenario, but if those two things combine, then the altitude of your club sneaks along the ground quite nicely, and we clip the ball away without too much ground interaction, which, as we well know, the legendary Tiger Woods, when he's flushing it, doesn't take divots. So, I think I'm not getting complaints from you, but yeah, I mean, there's a little bit more of a continuous flow to your forward rotation, but we still do see that little bit of kind of the exit of the elbow sort of tugging in behind the body, disappearing behind you. In real time, it doesn't really even look ungainly. But when we slow it down, I think, the lurching of Tommy Fleetwood's head backwards and downwards might look quite ungainly under the microscope, but in real time, it's a thing of beauty and most people covet it. So I think we'll do a little comparison here for you. So this is, of course, the 5-time major champion, Brooks Koepka. And although the footage is quite quirky here, a little bit jumpy, what I think's significant is it has a little whiff of a Drage sort of follow through in that the left arm sort of has a bit of flexion in it, and sort of, but it's not very pronounced in this piece of footage. I know that sounds slightly ironic, but the reason Brooks Koepka came to mind in the first place is his rotation isn't actually that exceptional compared to many. His hips are quite sideways on it. If you look from down the target line, I'll leave you to do that if you want, but you take my word for it, he's not very rotated in the midriff. Of course, very strong upper body and puts a lot of pressure on the ball with strength and brute force as much as anything. But, probably you'd say, okay, well, I don't see that, coach. I don't see that flexion in the left arm. And you think to yourself, okay, well, is that right or is that wrong, or am I just seeing things? Well, let's look at Brooks Koepka on another day. I think what becomes apparent here is that there is considerably more flexion in that left arm, quite a lot of sort of bend, if you want to put it that way. It does continuously rotate successfully, as you'd imagine it might have to keep up the kind of club speed that he's capable of and avoid any excessive strain on the body. But we don't know whether he was hitting a cut shot there. We don't know whether he was trying to hit a dead straight shot. But I think if we examine circumstances and we say, okay, well, if his left arm's getting shorter and his left shoulder is higher at impact, how come he can still hit the ball? How come he can still reach the ball? Well, maybe, let's just use his Nike tick on his shirt to see whether at the moment of impact, maybe he's a little bit, it's fractional, isn't it? It might be just as little as an inch or so. But that part of his body is actually slightly lower than it was when he set up. It's just maybe a hair above that line, and when he impacts the ball, it's below that line. There you go. Just minute, really. And from here on out, it just goes upwards, which is consistent with his body continuously and evenly rotating. So just saying, really, that Brooksy Koepka on 2 different days there, I don't know how many majors deep he was, respectively, in each of these examples of his swing, but Brooks Koepka operating with a slight loss of height, as we can see. It's very, very minor. Blink, it almost turn a blind eye to it. Depends how strict you're being as a coach. And maybe we live with it. Maybe we just say that's our way of doing it. We've had a little go at adding impetus in your rotation, with a view to having your left shoulder higher at impact perhaps, and allowing that left arm to go out to its full length. We've looked at experiments with rotating the forearm, so the rotation itself allows the left elbow to fold. I know you understand all this, and so do I. So it's like, if it's still there, and it's just the way we do it. We've explored about every single way possible to sort of nurture it into something else, but maybe it's just the way we do it. And I needn't show you Lee Westwood to show you an example of somebody who is profoundly more left elbow flexed. There's an argument that, you know, obviously if you chicken wing, which isn't quite what you do, but if you do sort of profoundly chicken wing, you're slowing the club head down, you're preventing that acceleration, and you're holding the face open in relation to the pass. So you get lots of cut shots and slices and weak shots. And we don't really complain of that. So, you know, I'm thinking keep doing what you're doing, and I'm just trying to make a strong case that we don't get too bent out of shape working on things this winter that probably don't need working on. But I would, as mentioned earlier in this vid, I would work hard on becoming more precise with your face awareness. I think you're pretty good at determining which part of the club the balls come off, and if there's any ground interaction and stuff like that. So I'd be keen to say keep doing what you're doing. Is really what's meant to happen. You're meant to get to a point where, you know, consistency is about doing it mostly the same in hitting shots in mostly the same way, with a couple of subtle variations just to, you know, tweak the shots in the way that we want. Little sign-off case in point. Let's look at this fellow. Shano. Clearly Shano has a end of backswing position which is designed for that shot shape, and I'm very confident that's what he was after in that situation. You can see from his body language. So yeah, very sort of open face at the end of his backswing. Let's just check in on that. You know, the toe of the club drooping down towards the ground, a bit of flexion in the back of his left wrist, cupping if you like, and through impact he's still side on somewhat. It's not as much as some, but more than others. Elbow and hip very close together. But so that left arm high above the right arm, holding the face open. Let's see whether his exit sees his elbow. Doesn't really sort of jut out sideways. Notwithstanding, he manages to hold the face open, which you sort of normally associate with a reverse rotation of the left arm. But it doesn't necessarily, and anatomically doesn't have to be that pronounced to produce the goodies, as we know. Lots of subtly different ways of doing the same thing. Let's have a look, just while we're indulging ourselves in your video time with a couple of swingers. I mean, you know, lots of credence to this. One of my favourites, as you might already know, the club almost perfectly on plane. You know, just a hair above perhaps. It's just it's so marginal, and the club travelling back down a little bit from underneath. I guess that's why you can hit drivers, soft draw with driver off the deck. But look at the way the club is at so many intervals married to this plane line. I was thinking, okay, Adam Scott's elbow folds nicely underneath, and then sort of the upper arm externally rotates into that characteristic sort of McIlroy-esque willowy finish. Different strokes for different folks, I suppose. Just trying to say, maybe we just do it our way and we keep doing what we're doing because we're going in the right direction. I think the interactions with the golf club for you, the extra ones we've got this season, are invaluable, and I think that really is what's been missing. Obviously, I'm going to still keep an eye on you. Anything quirky comes about or we want to discuss anything, I'm all ears, matey. As I say, keep doing what you're doing. Kirk out.